All right, welcome to today's podcast with my special guest, Lori Leigh Bellhumer with Western Youth Services. And today we'll be talking about Lori, who is one of my clients, talk about how she grew her nonprofit and how she applied the work system method and kind of walk you through the story of her transformation. So Lori, why don't we get started? Start from the beginning. How did you get into this business? Kind of what's your background? And then, give us the backdrop.
Okay. Well, Western Youth Services is a nonprofit that provides mental health services for children and families throughout Orange County, California. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I went, I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist and specializing in work with children. And I came into this profession because kind of my own story, my own background was one where there was, home wasn't a safe place necessarily. There was a lot of trauma. And because I had caring, dependable adults in my life outside of my home, I just have a passion for making sure that every child has one, whether it's a therapist or whether we're, interacting with teachers and it becomes a teacher, but just really, really passionate about making sure that all kids have that support that they need to be successful. And so I'm in the community work. So it's really a heart, I have a heart for like the community, not just a private practice. So that's how I ended up leading this organization. And so that's
good.
that. Uh-huh.
So what is the, give us the backdrop. So you heard about Work the System, Sam Carpenter's book, I'm assuming a few years ago. What was your business like when you heard about it? What were the issues you were dealing with?
Well, it was in the course of, business school classes, and we were talking about systems and the need for them. And so what the organization was like, we have several locations throughout this county. Mm-hmm. And what it was like before is they were kind of their own little fiefdoms, if you will. So they all kind of did a lot of things their own way. And so there were certain things that really needed to be consistent throughout every location, and they weren't. And so that's sort of where we were. And then even the departments here in the headquarters, mm-hmm. the finance and others, their systems weren't documented. So when people would leave, we'd have to drop everything to train the next person because we didn't have a consistent way. Or somebody would come in and go, "Oh, I think I'll do it this way." And nobody, everybody said, "Great, I'm glad it's getting done." And so there was a lot of duplicative efforts in the different departments here in the headquarters, as well as inefficient ways of doing things throughout the organization.
Wow. And I think a lot of people listening to this can probably relate to that, just that fiefdoms. I mean, you had it really complex because your organization is quite large, as each location had their own way of doing it. But even in small companies, each person has their own way of doing it. Yeah. And once that person's gone,
right.
It's hard to recover.
Yes.
Okay. So you were dealing with some of those struggles. You heard about this idea of systemizing your business, one of your business programs you were a part of. So then what happened next? I mean, did you read the book and try to make some changes, or?
That's it, actually, yes. So I had read the book probably a year prior, like it had been introduced and in the same setting, but I didn't really, at that time, I was dealing with other things in the organization, but I read the book from cover to cover. It's an easy read. Didn't take too long to read it. And so at first I was like, yeah, systems are a good thing. So then while I was working on some of the other things, then the topic came up again, and it was like, okay, it's time to focus on systems. So we decided to reach out to you, Josh, because we'd had the information for over a year. I had given some directives to, the department heads to, document what they're doing, systematize, but we didn't have any accountability around that because everybody was just doing their day-to-day, still doing the day-to-day. So when it came up again, I was like, okay, well, we're going to bring the expert in to help us have accountability about writing the systems, looking at our infrastructure, and making sure that one of our values here is efficiency.
Uh-huh.
So we highly value efficiency, and we realize that we were, I can say, far from it in some areas within the organization.
Yeah, and you had accomplished, large organization, you had accomplished a lot without much of that structure built in,
Amazing.
Which was amazing.
Looking back on it, it's like, oh my goodness, how did we do that? Yeah.
A lot of hard workers in your organization.
Yes,
a lot
very,
of hard workers.
very committed. Yes.
And hopefully now it's more simple. We'll get to that point, but the whole idea with systems for anyone listening is to simplify it and document it so that it's not so hard to do the work of every single day, less fires to put out. Okay, so the other point I think that is interesting is, in the case of full disclosure, and I've been working with Lori for about a year now, a little over a year, is that a lot of times people bring me on in to do the leadership part of the implementation. But even if you don't bring me on, that's something that you have to do. Someone has to be the leader, and someone actually does have to hold people accountable, and someone actually does need to make sure this change happens, because everyone likes the ideas. You mentioned systems sound great.
Yes.
Everyone likes the idea, but it's the implementation that is hard, and it's also the results don't happen in a day. That's so right. Somebody needs to believe it, and you really believed it. You had really good leadership with the belief in it and the willing to stick with it.
Yes, thank you.
And know that was going to happen. I think a lot of folks are like, well, that's not going to get solved in a few days. Maybe there's something else easier. And it's no, actually, this is the easy route, but it's going to take some work to get there.
Yes, and that was really part of the challenge in the beginning. Is everybody's like, we're too busy doing what we do to stop and take the time to write down what we do, and then when we write down what we do, we're too busy to reference it while we're doing it, and so it was just a persistent week after week after week of accountability. We did identify someone within the organization, because we're fairly large, to work directly with you, but also keep the ball rolling as we moved from one department to another. We didn't just drop the department and stop having accountability. So I got reports on a weekly basis of the progress that people were making, documenting all of the systems within their various areas of responsibility.
And I think I want to drill in a little bit on that, is that if you're, no matter what, so like you said, everyone's already busy. Everyone's already busy, of course. Doing this is going to be more work. So how do you make that happen? And you all did it in a very methodical way so that things didn't fall apart. And I think the other thing that people need to realize, a pragmatic approach, is that if you have, in your case, you had a lot of things going on in one department, the clinical department, a lot of changes, a lot of shifts. And so the clinical part, we just set aside, and we're going to do these departments first, and then work our way over to that, instead of just being unrealistic. And I think that that's why a lot of projects don't work, is they just say, well, we'll just do it all. And then that didn't work, and then they just stop.
It became abundantly clear we needed to focus on sort of the administrative, functions, the finance department, HR, those that, kind of run the business. We needed to get those in order first before we could tackle the fiefdoms out in the community. And yes, so, but once it took us, we thought we would finish in 6 months. It took us about a year to get the administrative headquarters done. I think, yes. Yeah.
So let's change gears a little bit and talk about some specifics. So with regards to systems, can you think of one in particular that you implemented and then a change happened, and kind of what that result was like? Did your team like it? Did the staff like it? What was the result after that?
Okay. Well, let me just say there were a ton of successes, and there were, as always, there were people that were early adopters, so they were like, let's, knock these out, like in finance. They just, they have internal controls that are documented, so they just, knock things out and they said, okay, we're done. you know.
Yep.
And then other departments that were more methodical, and once they'd start to write one, then 5 other ones emerged that they wrote. But, and I know we talked, we still talk, and I shared an example earlier with you, and I don't remember what that one is, but I have another one off the top of my head. And that is in our IT department. So we had, because we're a mental health services organization, we don't need to have the IT expertise in-house. So we had, we have an outside engineers that help us with that. But we have internal tier 1, tier 2 IT. And so the tier 1 person was really, checking, like, are you plugged into the wall? Just, things like that. And so they wrote systems and procedures for, I guess, for example, how to open a new user, how to create a new user account. And prior to that, the tier 2 person was like, I'm the only one, that can do this, and so they documented every step to do it. And then the tier 1 person was able to do it. So we were able to save money because we had a lower level person, person who was paid less, doing those sorts of things. And I think in that department in particular, there were a number of things that were delegated to a lower level person, and became more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's a really important concept that I think a lot of folks don't get. Is they say, I want to delegate more, but I can't because I know they won't do it as well as I do it. But once you document a tier 2 problem, and then you're able to hand it down to a tier 1 employee, then you immediately have a gain, and then it's repeat.
Right.
We'll
I think that was one of the things that you really stressed, and that we sort of latched onto right away, because we have a lot of high-level professional people that work within the organization, and they were doing a lot of things that someone who is paid less could do. And it would free them up, the clinicians, it'd free them up for more client time if we had administrative staff doing some of the things that the clinicians were doing. So it's really with an eye toward, again, this was what you prompted us on, with an eye toward efficiency, not only efficiency, but, financial effectiveness, to make sure that the lowest, whatever the lowest paid person could do, that's what they should be doing. Like high paid people should not be doing the work that others, and in our field, even volunteers are able to do. So that was really incredible.
Yeah, I think with your organization, a lot of folks don't have this added benefit, is that there are a lot of interns or volunteers or externs or folks that are spending a little bit of time there, that the more of the simple tasks that can be broken down and given to them, the better. But you also have the opposite challenge, which is being a nonprofit and getting public money. There's a lot of regulations you had to tackle with. So how did implementing systems work in an environment that you were so regulated, and how you did what you did?
Well, what we found, again, when we're looking at the fiefdoms, what we found is there are regulations that require us to track minutia. I'll just, say it that way. And it is what it is. It's taxpayer money, and so we understand that they want the data, and we're going to provide the data. And what we found is that in the different areas, they were tracking it differently based on the person's level of expertise in Excel, for instance. So we had a number of different kinds of Excel spreadsheets and different kinds of tracking, so that when we consolidated it, a lot of work was required just to get it into a consistent format. And we didn't realize that until we started to look at, how we were doing things. What's the Western Youth Services way of doing things? And so once we realized that, and we haven't perfected it yet, because some of it requires training in Excel and things of that nature, but it's really getting to the point where we're asking and what are the best practices? What are the things that are most efficient? Let's implement those, and then we also have a system for continuous improvement on the policies and procedures.
The one thing, and I'm assuming you're going to probably echo this, that it's happened as well, as I noticed with your company, is that when I first got there, they were really focused on doing things to be compliant and doing things the way they've always done them to stay compliant. And I think now they're more excited about the future, knowing that the direction that, and the course your company set is not, we do what the government says. We're going to actually do what's in our charter, our vision, and we're going to do things according to our principles, and we're going to do things that are more creative, more innovative, and it's going to be more about what is the best way, the right way to do this, not just what's the way we've always done it before, and being more willing to do that because there's a framework to store those ideas now. So exactly. I noticed that a lot in the business.
That's definitely true, and we found some areas where it's, in psychology they talk about how superstitions are developed, and so some processes seemed really convoluted. So with regard to superstition, so that's the way we always did it, but it's another Band-Aid, another Band-Aid, another Band-Aid, another Band-Aid, and so we're looking at and I'll give you a really good example. This is so funny. You may not use this in here, but if you do, it's really funny. So we were upgrading our voicemail system because it was fairly antiquated, and so then they were redoing the announcement on the phone, or the message, the outgoing message. And so they said, well, Lori wants this one person to be the voice of the answering machine throughout the agency. And it was somebody who still worked here, maybe, it was from 11 years ago, and this male voice was the one that was on the voicemail in our office, in the main office. So, and he doesn't speak Spanish, but our recording is, it says if you want to speak it, oprime el número dos if you want to speak Spanish, or if you need it in Spanish. And so it was just like that. It was oprima el número dos cuando llamar en español. It was, and so I was like, why would you think that Lori would want someone who doesn't speak Spanish to be the voice on the and he was the voice at the time because he worked in this office. Right. And so
10 years ago.
10 years ago in this office. Now he works in a different office. So I don't know, but it was pretty funny.
Just that they just carried over and carried over.
This is what Lori wants, not this is because it's efficient or whatever. But so some of the things were done because someone perceived that I wanted it done a particular way, which is yes, I want it done the right way.
Right. So. That's really interesting because people want to please the owner, right? And you can't read the owner's minds. And this is for any owner. Your employees want to do a good job. Your team does, but you have to tell them what a good job is. And I think that, you had some strategic documents when I got there, but really clarifying that strategic initiative, you called it in your business. We call it a strategic objective. Clarifying that and then having those principles, enables folks to know, what is a good job instead of just, 10 years ago, Lori wanted this one person to do it. So let's just always have this one person do it forever.
Right.
That's funny.
That is funny. And I think in having the principles and refining them, with your help, what it really did was it gave us another level to hold people accountable to. So if our culture is, whatever it takes, then telling someone we don't do that here, isn't how we behave. That's not how we serve the community. And so in many, many areas, we were able to tie a person's performance back to those principles. We we respond professionally in the office. There was, one office that had a little gossipy thing going on that happens in companies, from time to time. And so one of our values is and principles is, I don't know exactly the way that it's worded right now, but it's like you honor and respect your peers, and and you're uplifting and you're positive. And so when we had those instances, we could go back and say, this is the direction we're heading. So this behavior is not consistent with the principles that we've set. And we can do that because we included all of the employees in the development of that document that had the principles on it. And with regard to the strategic initiative, I made sure I went out to, each of the different locations and got input from everybody. And really, they all had an opportunity to connect the dots for what they were doing that was moving us forward, on our mission and moving us toward our strategic goals.
I think that's, that was key for buy-in for you, is getting their input. And I think also, instead of just Lori wants it done this way, it's, we all helped create these principles, and these actually we all want it this way, not just Lori. And the strategy we actually believe in. It's a good vision. And I think that that really helps with any size company with the buy-in. Is it's not just, well, we got to follow this one person because she said so.
Right.
That really does help solidify it. That's interesting. Okay, so how about now? So kind of give us a fast forward, and let me actually add a little background to this. For those of you who have for-profit businesses, as you systemize things, it's a lot easier than what Lori had to go through, because you can drive more sales, you can drive more leads, you can really boost the growth of your business, meanwhile decreasing expenses. But in the case of your business, it's a lot more government contracts, grants. You have to wait for certain cycles. You can't just turn the lever and immediately just sales just go up, because of the framework you have to work in, the regulations you have to deal with, and the fact that you got to do it in 20 different languages as you're doing it along the way. It's just really complicated. And so a lot of it had to do with just getting what you did more efficient, but not necessarily getting huge wins in sales, because you couldn't make sales that way.
Right. And what it did was it made for much happier employees. Once they got the documentation done in certain, the departments that are complete, what we found is we have had some turnover, and the person came in and how to do the job was done. The other is that we're doing the evaluations, and people know exactly what success looks like in that position. And so we can tie it back to the things that are, this is how Western Youth Services does it. This is how this position does it. And when it's done that way, I feel good. I feel like I've accomplished something. And I feel better about, my job, because the expectations are more clear, and the way I get my job done is more efficient.
Yeah. And that's something that, and you had some turnover, like you said, employees don't like that in the beginning. They don't like the extra accountability. But once it's set in place and the culture is shifted, it certainly makes for a better culture, better environment, with that clarity. Just knowing if you're in the right or in the wrong, there's no more hiddenness, and that really does improve on a whole host of areas. All right. So the one thing I'm kind of don't want to miss, I know we're running low on time here, is kind of the exciting things that now you're able to do. And this is not necessarily the original reason that it wasn't a big focus for me when I first started consulting, but now as I'm doing it with more and more companies, seeing that, yes, the culture gets better, and yes, the structure's better, and the efficiency's better, and all those things happen, more sales. But also the owner, and in your case, you've got a special opportunity, gets to do the special projects and special initiatives they never could do before. Yes. So maybe you can tell us about, where your company's at now and what that's allowed you to do.
Well, it's allowed me to get out of the day-to-day, period. And a lot of times as business owners, I'm not the owner or founder of this nonprofit, but I run it as if I'm the owner. And I take that level of pride and responsibility for what we're doing here. So what it's meant for me personally is that I'm out and about in the community more often. So I'm working on the business, not in the business.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making connections with pretty high level decision makers and attending I'm in a higher level of circle of influence, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so meeting with funders and things that I didn't have the time for, or if I made the time for it, it would make for an 80-hour week.
Yep.
Something that's not sustainable. And that's really what it was for me, was working nights, weekends, for a long period of time, realizing it wasn't sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going home earlier. I'm not working on the weekends. You'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah, good.
And when things are, it's so much easier in my department, like the people that support me, their procedures are documented, their guidelines are documented. So when something's missed, we could just report, did you use the guideline? It's so much easier to point it back to something as opposed to getting frustrated because it's done differently, 15 times, done 15 different ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, then what about, because what you do is we got to work with high level folks and the semi-political and quasi-governmental, the things you do, but also, and maybe this is premature, but you're also moving into some things with your proprietary way of helping people, which you've developed over decades. And, it's always been done within the nonprofit local level, but I think there's opportunities now at a national level.
That's exactly right. So the creative part, the things I get to do in the way that my brain is wired, I get to do those things. So there's more visioning, there's more project, sort of getting the ideas down. I know that what we do here helps kids tremendously. And so we feel like we have an obligation to share the how as much as possible. So we have been working on that proprietary system of how we collaborate and how we, with schools and how we integrate the services. And it's just a way that we do it that garners a lot of success. And so, yes, that is one of the things we have. I get to have my conference table all covered with, projects that I was not able to get to. I saw a document that was dated 2013 that I'm revisiting because we documented some things back then, but we didn't take it anywhere because we didn't have the time. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this was 5 years ago. And so it's exciting because now we have time to do those things. Now I have time to do the things that, make my heart sing, to know that we're going to serve more kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's really exciting. So I think entrepreneurs, they all have special gifts, and, a lot of times it's just localized within their business, and then it just can't expand. I think with what you're doing now, and what you do is very unique, the way you help kids and families. Mm-hmm. So that's the exciting thing, is that now it can actually be packaged and delivered in a way that's not bound so much by regulating authorities, but really could be expanded nationally, internationally, make some big impacts.
We are international now because we did one of our trainings in Vancouver and Guatemala.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, very good.
So
well,
we don't even have it all documented yet, but we did it, and it was very, very, one was at an orphanage in Guatemala, talking to them about, trauma and how it impacts behavior and brain science and all of that. And in Vancouver, it was with a school. The principal brought us in and how to speak to the teachers about how to build resilience and things of that nature.
Exciting.
So very exciting.
That's awesome. Well, one last question. So what advice would you give someone who, is just hearing about the work system method and they're thinking about it? What advice would you tell them? Would you tell them that it's a good idea, bad idea? What advice?
Well, absolutely. I would say it's a good idea. I would say, so the advice would be document your systems. use Josh to help you do that, because he has a method to get there. And you didn't ask me to say that, but I'm just, the way that you really just, the training that you brought and the insight that you brought to my team really helped solidify and keep it going, solidify why we needed to do it, and also to have that accountability around it. And the other thing I would say about it is it makes life a lot easier, when, again, for me to be working, still feeling like we're accomplishing more actually than we did before, and I'm working less. And that's really good, because the pace I was on was not sustainable. So
no, it wasn't. It's working way too hard.
I know. Well, yeah,
Well, that's awesome.
it was getting it done, but now, yeah. So it's really,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Laura, for the great interview, for the insights. Hopefully, everyone listening to this or watching this has learned a few things, and also seen. I mean, I think the key thing here that I'm noticing again is Lori's determination to actually stick with it over the long haul, and then believing, yes, if I put this infrastructure in place, it will pay off. And I know you want it in 6 months. You've got a very complex multi-location office under really high stress. It was a hard project, but that the light did happen at the end of the tunnel, and
Yes.
I'm glad things are a lot better now.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Lori.
You're welcome, Josh.
Weekend.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Bye-bye.